So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. The official welcome is actually going to be done by the partner of this event, Sharon Constançon. She's in London. She's the head of the South African Chamber of Commerce UK, and we've been partnering with the Chamber for, on this Global Citizen Dialogue series. She will tell you a little bit about it. The only reason I'm here is to let you know that we're doing this as a bit of a hybrid event, so it's wonderful to have a live audience again after you know, when we had to do all of this virtually and online. So that this is the first time we're actually doing it live, but we also have a live stream. And Sharon is going to join us at 1 o'clock, and she will do the official opening, and she will introduce the Vice-Chancellor, and then he will then conduct proceedings and will tell you how the rest of this event is going to unfold. So also don't leave before, because there's a bit of a surprise for you. I'm not going to ask you to look under your seats. It's not one of those shows. But there will be a surprise for you. So please stay until the end, and then there will also be something afterwards for you to also join us. So we'll wait a few more minutes. Carmenita, I think she's around somewhere. She'll let us know when we're going to go live. Oh, Sharon's there already. And then we'll officially start the event. So enjoy the event, everyone.
Sharon, we can start.
Good day to everybody. Is that okay? Sound all right? Okay, I've got a thumbs up. Wickham, is that fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, do I need to start the webinar on my side?
Yes, please. You can start, thank you.
Welcome everybody. It is wonderful to have everybody present in person, as Russell was saying a little earlier. We've had many challenges in terms of getting events to work well in many ways since the COVID environment. So it's wonderful to see all of you. I did have a view of the full auditorium a moment ago, and thank you. Welcome to everybody. I am Sharon Constançon. I am chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, which is a UK-based entity. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of our platinum member, the University of the Free State. We've run this Global Citizen program, as mentioned by Russell a little earlier, for a number of years now, and we have interviewed and engaged with a large number of people, which has been extremely insightful, interesting, and gives us many foods for thought, day in, day out, as these events have occurred. But as Russell said, this is the first one we're doing as a hybrid event, and also the first one that we are holding within the South African in-person environment, and also the first event for the Bloemfontein chapter, Free State chapter, which is a new chapter of the Chamber. We have 4 chapters now within the South African continent, if I don't want to call it continent, country is probably better. And we've got many chapters through the UK, Ireland, and the Crown dependencies as well. So we make sure that we reach the South Africans in person where they are, as well as allowing people to visit us in London or to come online and to enjoy time with us. Today we have this hybrid event. Tonight we have an in-person only event in London. And a couple of weeks ago, actually, we had a hybrid event where our audience was hybrid. Some in the room at South Africa House, iconic building in London, and the other half were online. Then we had a hybrid delivery of the event where we had chairman in person of the committees, but most of the time we had a panel that was in person and hybrid at the same time. It was a challenge. It was an extreme success because we know we only get to the quality of speaker we need if we have the ability to be able to reach beyond the in-person space, to be able to get to speak to people. So to our guest, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you because you are quite an impressive individual. I have read your bio, but it's my opportunity to actually introduce Francis to you, Prof Francis. But before I do that, can I please ask that any audience that have a Q&A or a question to ask in the online audience, please post that onto our Q&A function. I will pick those questions up and from this point of view, pose those to either of our panelists as appropriate. Russell will run the audience Q&A from the room so that we give everybody an opportunity to contribute. When it comes to introducing Prof Francis Petersen, I get routinely intimidated. This man makes me want to hide in the shadows of capability. He has studied 2 master's degrees, a PhD, he's in engineering. He spent his time in academia, in science, in strategy, in business, and he is currently the Vice-Rector, the Rector and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Free State, having educated through Stellenbosch and held a dean role in the built environment for UCT. So a very highly respected individual, very highly competent individual, who, as I said, always makes me feel intimidated when I have to introduce him. Because if I look at the rest of the CV that I have not mentioned, you're welcome to look him up. Very, very interesting individual. Francis will be talking to Iraj Abedian, who's an extremely interesting individual, but I shall leave Francis to do that introduction for us. So I look forward to sharing the hour with you and to pick up with you at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And I hope it's a little bit warmer in London. But it's, I also would like to welcome our audience here in the Odeon Theatre at the Bloemfontein campus of the University of the Free State, and also our audience that are connected globally, virtually. It's going to be a very interesting conversation this afternoon, and I would like to introduce, sitting on my right, Dr Iraj Abedian. Iraj is the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Investments and Research Services Company. He's also Chairman of the Pan-African Holdings Pty Limited. During his career, he also spent time at the University of Cape Town as a professor of economics, and has advised various entities, various ministers, various ministerial departments, and I think his focus during these years has been on economic policies, so it's fantastic. Now, Iraj, your title this afternoon that you want to talk about is the Rising global quest for social justice, the role of business, investment funds, and corporate leaders. Tell us a little bit more what that title really means.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and my apology for my husky voice and this flu. I tried to overcome it. I think the title relates to something that in South Africa we should relate to, the role of business. We've just come out of the Zondo Commission report. We've seen how businesses recklessly have destroyed a lot of assets, paralyzed, in my view, our national treasury, national fiscus, hollowed out Eskom, Transnet, the infrastructure of our economy, the underpinning of an economy, and it is not unique to South Africa. Globally, as we sit here, similar type of things are happening across the continent, and definitely in most, if not all, of the emerging economies. That's what the hub of the debate is. So it's not theoretical, it's not philosophical, it's real, and we are part of it whether we want or not.
Okay. So elaborate a little bit more about the title and the talk.
Look, the context in which we experience this, for me, and I'm an economist, a student of economics, and actively involved in the business sector. If you look at humanity, all of us, we're going through, and we have gone through various phases of transition. Once upon a time, we were hunter-gatherers, became agrarians, became industrialists, became post-industrialists, and at the moment, put a label on it. Digital age, fourth industrial revolution, we haven't quite made up our mind. As we've gone through this process, we have evolved. We have reinvented ourselves. We've responded to the dynamics, industrial, social, psychosocial elements of where we had to survive. For example, during the agrarian or hunter-gatherer age, it was masculinity which mattered. You had to go and fight the beasts. So we praised and adored masculinity. We had heroes, we had warriors, and misogynist behavior became the norm, familiar. And men thought, well, that's how life should be. Then industrial age comes in, and I'm going as fast as I can. Suddenly we realize that masculinity alone is not enough to succeed, to dominate, to conquer. So we had to scale up production. We had to become clever. Our mind had to develop invention, industrialization, scaling up became the order of the day. The means of success was not how powerful you are, how much muscle you have, but it's about how clever you are, and you can automate things and produce more, bring the cost of production per unit down, push your competitors out. So then masculinity and muscular body strength had to be complemented with intellect. And of course that evolved us to a different level, but still we had a lot of other evolutionary challenges that we had to do. For example, in the age of industrialization, greed, because now that you can produce a lot more and you can push your competitors out, from your country you want to go to the next country, and from the continent you want to go to the next continent. So imperialism emerged. And how do you do it? Well, you must convert your sword to tanks and bullets and guns and missiles and aeroplanes and fighter jets, etc., etc., etc. So with that evolution came a lot of shortcomings. We had to evolve to manage our intellectual ability. Post-industrial revolution, we now have a different challenge. Now we are scared of our intellectual growth. We think that AI, right? You've all heard of AI, you deal with it. Artificial intelligence suddenly is threatening us. It's a fact that as we sit here over the next 10 years, AI, which is the byproduct of human intelligence, is going to destroy between 200 to 300 million jobs. But but it's also going to transform the nature of the economy, the nature of education, the nature of health, the nature of the society, the relationship between parents and kids. And what does that mean? That means, well, we have to evolve with it. We can't bring industrial age attributes and live in the age of digital operations. So it helps us to evolve, but we're battling. As we sit here on the planet for the first time, whether you are the most advanced or the least advanced, you are the biggest or the smallest, the weakest or the strongest, no matter which background you come from, we feel threatened by what's around us. We seem to be in the stage of transition that every day something new hits us. And how do we cope with that? And as Homo sapiens, we now have to evolve from Homo sapien or human 1.1 to human 2. But we don't know what exactly it means. What we do know is that certain things that we observe and we think is normal is not normal. Maybe familiar, but it's not normal. For example, misogyny, abuse of women, abuse of children, abuse of others is very common, is familiar. And in South Africa, we cannot deny that from the time that we drive out of our houses, we see poverty, we see crushing hunger, misery, abuse, and it's familiar, but it's not normal. These are familiar, unacceptable, unsustainable symptoms of the age of our previous industrialization. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, how do we avoid, fight, battle, struggle against making these abnormal, very familiar, but not normalizing familiar symptoms? And that's our challenge, all of us. I suggest in our families we have it, at workplace we have it, governments have it, and corporates have it. Now, my apology, you think that when I use the term corporates, they are creatures that have nothing to do with us. The fact is that all our pensions are used by these corporates. Check it out. Fund managers make decisions about you and my future on the decision that they make on our pension funds. They don't have their own money. The society's money is limited to a pool of what economists call it, pool of national savings, and these national savings are in the hands of asset managers at Old Mutual, Sanlam, Liberty, etc., etc. They talk about they are the investors, but they are deciding on us. What ethics follows them? What balance of emotional, intellectual, and social intelligence do they have to make these decisions? And when they make the wrong decisions, when they refuse to back off because they have a title of CEO, CFO, minister, president, general, whatever, the consequences of those poor decisions, because they are not balanced as human beings in terms of caring for ethical conduct, for sustainable environment, for fair distribution of what the workers get and what the executives get, what politicians can and should not do. When they don't have the maturity as human beings in a balanced way to do it, then suddenly we see a very sad, tragic situation that those who are in business, in the name of business and investment, make decisions, and those who are in the offices of political nature or public nature, they make decisions based on what drives them, their greed, their love of power, and this chief executive the same. The consequence is 5,500 pages of the Zondo Commission report in South Africa.
I'll come back to that, Iraj. I want to before I jump to the private sector, I want to pause a little bit with the state. Now, you also made in a preamble of the title of your talk a statement that you said that the states globally are not that efficient anymore. They're actually becoming more weaker. Now, my understanding of what the state should be is there should be adequate competency in the state. There should be ethical principles and the ethic of engaging as a state with their citizens. That need to be key. And then very importantly, the state need to understand that they serve the citizens. Now, if the statement that you made is not only in South Africa or in the African continent, it's a global statement, I want to understand why. Why did governance and why are governments getting weaker and actually is not effectively delivering what they should deliver?
I think the history of the evolution, the establishment and the evolution of national states particularly over the past 100-odd years, which was the byproduct of the Industrial Revolution age, created strictures, forms, rules of how we must manage military, because it's us, our nation, against the others we need to protect. So the concept of military, the concept of national security, the concept of information. Some information is secretive, is highly sensitive stuff, right? So this comes from that age where the means of information gathering, information generation was very, very different from information today. And yet the processes of the governments, not just our government, globally, they haven't changed. For example, America spends a great deal of huge amounts of money on national security. China counteracts it. Russia counteracts them. And so it goes. So if you look at a bird eye view, if you sit in a sort of one of these drones and go above the earth, what do you see human beings doing there? They're using their resources to do what? Massive amounts of it to spy on each other, to destroy resources. Because let's be absolutely honest with ourselves. Guns, bullets, missiles, and it's become now galaxies. These are not productive use of limited resources. Do we need guns? Yeah, to protect against animals, yeah, against mad people, yes, but the ratio of mad to sane people is very, very tiny. We don't need to spend so much resources. But every country on this planet that you and I look at it from above, every money that is spent on military in the name of security creates the opposite of security. But what do we need as human beings, as human dot two? What is my and your notion of security? Is that not only our communities are safe, not only our country is safe, but also our neighbor is safe. Because if they are not safe, sooner or later, our security will be compromised. Look at the Europeans. They're fighting the boats going from North Africa to the rest of Europe. And yet they've spent a lot of money with the help of very intelligent but not balanced human beings in the name of strategic planning in defense of our nation. But are they in security? No. Germany is not in security, Russia is not in security, China is not in security, US is not security. But look at the amount of money that is spent, the amount of human resources, the best of intelligence. To do what? This type of conduct of this Homo sapiens, human.1, belongs to a different era. Governments operate in that mindset. The society is somewhere else. There is a disconnect between governments and the citizens.
So, Iraj, just on that point, if there is a disconnect between governments and society, and because I've also read recently that a government said that, we don't have so much liquidity in terms of finance to do A, B, and C. The question is then that they would then go and make the statement that business is much more liquid. Now, if we pay taxes, there is certainly an expectation. Is that fair on business to come in and do the things that we believe government should be doing? Is the disconnect or the connectivity between business and the society that they serve much more relevant, much more stronger than the connectivity between governments and society?
Yeah, I think when governments are inefficient and misallocate resources, examples I gave, what do? Governments got no resources. Government can only really do two things. One is tax, you and I and the businesses. Their citizens, whether they are natural citizens like you and I, or legal citizens like entities, companies, and so on. That pool of resources is meant to reach for the welfare of the society. If it's not, what they end up doing, they either borrow, but government borrowing means committing future generations to repay it. That's it. But if governments are not productive, if they are not using what they borrow to build the economy, they leave behind debt that your children and the grandchildren and my children and the grandchildren have to pay for it. Let's bring it down to a reality. In 2012, 2013, 2014, the South African government borrowed with a mix of taxes and borrowing to launch Medupi and Kusile. It was meant to cost us 89 billion rand. Even government didn't at that time have the 89 billion rand. Let's round it up, 90 billion. As we sit here, Kusile and Medupi have spent over 300 billion rand and not finished yet. You and I have power cuts. So what happened here? Unethical business and unethical and misguided politicians got into a cahoot. The consequences is quite clear. Not only we don't have electricity, not only Eskom is destroyed as a business entity that once upon a time was the best utility, definitely power utility in the world. You may not know this, but apartheid government could not borrow in international capital markets. It was embargoed. But Eskom could borrow because it was regarded as a well-run business. When new government came, it took 6 years before they could borrow. In the meantime, Eskom could borrow and generate. So Eskom, from being that type of entity, is destroyed today, which is rubbished by ourselves and by their executives and by the ministers and by the presidents, our own presidents. How many times have you heard our president saying Eskom hasn't got capacity, doesn't know, full of corruption, full of abuse? So they are rubbishing the institution. And yet they spent 300 billion of our future revenues in the name of power. So is it fair on business? Of course not, because they've taxed the business what they could. They're taxing them again, because every business has to now have a generator and have a cost and so on. Every family has to have additional cost. Those who paid the tax in the past, their expectation was that this government is going to put it to good use, to create adequate power so that the economy can grow, so that we have more income, so that we have more taxes. From those more taxes, pay back the debt. Guess what? Now we've got the debt and no capacity. Business is suffering at the same time. Instead of flourishing, it's contracting. This morning, employment numbers came as I was sitting here. We lost more employment jobs, as if we could afford it. So that is the problem, that when governments are not effective, when they are not focused, when they don't have political morality, when they haven't grown out of the age of strong men and position and titles, they've got the power, but they haven't got the emotional, intellectual, and moral balance to cope with the power that they have. It's like putting a teenager behind a Ferrari. What do you think he'll do or she'll do? Rest assured, we'll crash it. And look at around the globe, how many governments have crashed the Ferrari of the state? Not on just our government. Look at UK. Look at United States.
So,
Find me a society, sorry to
interrupt.
find me one society that people say, no, we know this driver is running this vehicle okay. Our governments are heading the right way. No, there is a disconnect everywhere.
So I want to finish off a bit on the state, but with the last question. You know, when I said that if the state can't deliver, which we expect them to deliver, business comes in, and there is an expectation from the state. So the whole idea of accountability is not there. But furthermore, if there's a disconnect between the state and society does not respond, it can create the impression that society is accepting it. Now, obviously, that's very simplistic, because societies innovate and adapt and do all of those things. But that culture of acceptance can lower the bar morally within society, because the bar just becomes lower and lower. How would you comment on that? Is that something that we should be very careful about?
That's the central piece of what you and I and all of us have to do, because we come from a time where, I mean, look at the languages that we use. We use governing party, right? So there is a governed, you and I, and the governor. So who are we to talk about the governor? We are governed, we must just follow. There is a king and a subject, right? So this language doesn't belong to today. We can't be passive participants in this process of governance, whether it's a corporate governance, companies, or whether it's countries' governance. And yet those who are in charge, they call it chief executive officer. Not in the army, in the companies. You just read my, he's the chief executive officer. It's a militaristic term. And yet I'm just an investment guy going to work every day, sweating it out. But the title is chief executive officer. It's a military term, does not belong to today. I do not order people what they should do, right? I'm coordinating a set of capabilities within the company. Calling me chief coordinator, yeah, that's better. And it's not also the right term, because we must find a new term. The point is this: we are in a new era. We need to redefine terms. We need to find new terminology that you and I can apply with. But at the moment, if you look at society, society has got three protagonists: individuals, the community, and the institutions. All three of them have to reinvent themselves, because this age of transition requires different thinking, different terminology, different way of operating. You and I cannot just be passive and just put label on governments if we are not putting them into account. You and I cannot be passive if our investment, who do our pensions, as I mentioned, we can't be passive. And I ask you, how many times have you got to the General Assembly of your pension funds? I submit, never. And you have better things to do. Well, if you have better things to do, then later you wake up and when you're about to retire, you see that your pension fund is not worth, not able to live, to keep your living. And who do you blame? Who should I blame? So accountability requires a consistency in each one of us in terms of what we believe and what we do. It requires a consistency between those who are in charge of the investments within the society, whether in the public sector or private or public sector, a consistency, a harmony between the values that they espouse and what they do. If ministers say, this is what I want to do, well, end of the year, they mustn't give me another speech. They come and say, this is what we've generated. And if not, you and I have to have a platform for taking them into account. And I hope that answers.
No, I think it does. So I want to move slightly to the business sector from a different angle. Now, you mentioned earlier about the Zondo Commission, and obviously we link it directly to the state capture. And I'm not going to talk about the involvement of the politicians there. And we know what the impact of state capture did to South Africa. It's not only about 2 trillion rand that was stolen. It was also the fact that we had downgrading in our investment rating into the country. It also impacts the socio-economic aspects of our citizens. So it challenged the governance of institutions. So you can go into a whole list. It's not only about the money. It's the impact that it actually made on the total economy and the psyche of our people. Now, they often say it takes 2 to tango. So surely the state capture would not have been that successful, if I use successful between inverted commas, if there weren't private sector involvement. And I would like us just to talk a little bit about that, the private sector involvement. And it perhaps doesn't come out that clear in the Zondo Commission, because the Zondo Commission's emphasis was probably much more on the public sector, although there had been, there was mentioned in the Zondo Commission about the private sector. So I want to understand the private sector collusion toward the success of the state capture, and then perhaps depending on how you respond, I want to bring accountability in there, and what is the expectation from the society that we talk about on those private sector companies that were part of helping the state capture to be successful?
It is no doubt that state capture could not have happened if either of the 2 parties, politicians and businesses, were not playing. And as a footnote, we are an academic institution. I just want to put a footnote that in the new age, it doesn't take 2 to tango. It takes 3 to tango. It's the individual, the community, and the institutions. We can come back. That's end of footnote. But you look at businesses that were involved, global businesses and local businesses. We have some of them in the Zondo Commission, Mackenzie's, Gartner, Hitachi, SAP, not South African Police, the German IT company, SAP. And I can go on and on. KPMG, these are auditors, bankers, lawyers, Bain & Co. They stole hundreds of billions to the tune of 2 trillion that they've stolen. But that's not all the damage. I wish they had just stolen the blessed money and gone. It's the damage that they've caused to SARS, to NPA, to Transnet, to ESCOM, to everything that has to do with governance. Not only they've stolen the money, now we haven't got the money, and we will not have, and this is my considered public view, that the longer we wait, the less we will have the money to restore the damage that they've got. I spent 20 years, 25 years teaching, so I'm going to use an example. And I told some of these culprits themselves. So it's not that I'm talking behind their back. Not only they broke my house and they stole my laptop, which are parallels I can't do, but in order to steal the laptop, they also broke the gate, the room, the house, and they damaged. It's not good enough that they must give me the laptop. Do I make sense? Because the damage that they left behind is more consequential than the laptop. I can convert the laptop in one way or another. I can get another, but I haven't got the money to build the house. And I'm insecure in my house. And my family is vulnerable. I'm using an analogy. That's what they've done. As we sit here, we are a vulnerable, fragile state because the underpinning of our economy, which is ESCOM and Transnet and roads, and drive around Mangaung, you'll see potholes. And government hasn't got the resources. Go to any university, any college, any hospital, the minister comes in pleading, we haven't got money, right? People are dying in our hospitals. People are dying because there is no water, but this is the money that was meant to build the dam and canals, and is it not? And when do you think at zero economic growth we're going to get the 2 trillion plus the damages to rectify this, to restore this? And even if we have the money tomorrow, it will take another 7 to 10 years to get back to where we are. So what are we going to do? Those 3 protagonists that have to tango now. It's individuals, you and I, our communities, our institutions. We need to say, well, you've agreed that you've caused this. How and what is the appropriate compensation? You've broken the door, you've broken the window, and it's nobody accusing you. We have a legal and lawyer-filled commission that has generated 5,500 pages of evidence. We are not accusing anybody. We have documented it. And by the way, the Zondo Commission's 5,500-page report is less than 5% of the evidence. The only reason that they had to get the report out is because we were getting impatient that it may take another generation to deal with the 95% that they haven't touched. Do I make sense? So the question is, do you want to keep quiet? We are one of the 3 that have to tango. Our institutions have to mobilize, our individuals have to mobilize, and our communities are going to mobilize. And rest assured, unless we mobilize, nobody is going to volunteer to pay. Bain & Co., a global consulting company, as we speak, in a belligerent way, is denying that they were involved in the destruction of SARS and the demolition of that institution. They're taking the National Treasury to court. So forget about if we sit quiet, the unethical, the greedy, the misogynist, the abuser does not wake up by itself. It's the same attributes of the previous age. These corporates who have caused this, they are not going to volunteer to say, oh, your kids are dying in hospital and your old age, let me do something. You haven't got clean water, you've got potholes and so on and so forth. No, we got to mobilize. We got to do it. This is the new age of not only we want social justice, but we need to demand it. We need to go and get it. And we need to learn how to do it. Don't ask me. I've got some ideas, but I haven't got all the ideas.
Iraj, so I think what I read into what you're saying is there need to be reparations. Now, if those companies do come to the party and they do pay the reparation, I would say, for the lack of a better word, fee, I would imagine that probably should go in a fund. How do you ensure that that we don't end up with the same corruption? And if you have such a fund, that could be quite extensive.
Yes, a very good question. It's the same question that in the new society, we are not silent, governed citizens. We are active, human.2 participants in our welfare. So what are some of the options? We have to decide if our government cannot be trusted and if our institutions are damaged so that we can trust them that they'll use it the right way. What are our options? We can put a national, what did we do during COVID? An example, it's an interesting one. Government said we don't have capacity. Nobody wanted to put money in another project of government because they knew where it's going to go. I mean, you don't have to be super intelligent to know that any minister is there They don't worry about you and I, they worry about their cousins and their future. And we have enough evidence from all of them. And it's not a partisan thing. It's not ANC or DA, EFF, or all of them. They belong to a different age. So what did we do? We created a National Solidarity Fund. It was governed differently. Did it deliver vaccines to different places? I would suggest as a first step was a good success. And they didn't rely on government alone. Government was part of it. They have to be. In all that I say doesn't mean that the age of government has gone. No. Government must reinvent itself, reimagine itself, redirect itself, reprogram itself. The same way that you and I have to do it. The same way that men have to do it. Men cannot take women as the old age that they used to. And women should not accept that the men treat them that way. Right? So we need to understand that these three new players need to learn to do it. And if a fund is established, we need to say, okay, who do we trust to be on the governance side of it? What do we trust and if is going to be tested and tried mechanism of delivery that we can do it. Will it be different? Yeah. Will the ministers be upset? Upset they should be. Will the politicians whinge? Better that they do. But people will get the result. They'll get the vaccine.
Iraj, I sort of looking at the time, but I want to squeeze in another question before I'm going to ask Russell to see whether there's any questions here in the audience, and then I'm going to give back to London, to Sharon, because this conversation is only heating up now, and then we're almost running out of time. But I want to move to a more positive outlook. So we talk about society, and I want to say that there are inherent strengths amongst members of society. Mm. I'm also very hopeful, and I'm confident that there are South African diaspora abroad that is very passionate about the country. So how do we leverage that positive capacity to be able to craft and to build a way forward? You were talking about rebuilding. Even if we get the 2 trillion rand back, it will take about 5 to 7 years. But how do we start doing that? Because we can't just say, well, our house, our gates, our computers, our windows has been completely demolished by the state capture. I want us to move to a positive and a futuristic approach. How would one do that?
I think the good news is that we haven't given up. And technology is on our side. And our society and our DNA in South Africa especially, and worldwide, in fact, I would argue if we had time, that the DNA of our society is in our favor. Yes, we went quiet for a while. We were deceived. But now, if I look at our youth, they are not taking this nonsense anymore. They don't have the same level of reverence and respect for these institutions. So the youth, the technology, and the national resources, as an economist talking, of South Africa are in our favor. And interestingly, globally, the ones that are at the forefront of learning and challenging are the youth. In Europe, which is a relatively old population, these are the youth who are at the forefront of environmental sustainability, doing governance different. These were the youth who were pushing for COVID vaccines not to be stored in Europe, but be sent to other places too. And that's a fact. It wasn't the strategists and the security analysts and so on. It wasn't the chief executive of the army or the chief executive of the corporation. It was the youth who were saying, we don't need so many vaccines to be stored. Guatemala needs it, Africa needs it, Middle East needs it. So the youth is our source of hope. Technology is on our side. If you look at our problems, for example, electricity, which is a daily challenge we have, quite frankly, the technology will save all of it if we have the right leadership in the private and public sector and in the community, you and I, I am prepared to put every penny that I've learned on this table in a public, that within 18 months, every house in South Africa could be with electricity. Okay. Not just the rich, the poor too.
Iraj, I'm going to ask Russell just to test the audience, maybe for 1 or 2 questions, and then I'm going to hand over to Sharon. There's so many other things I wanted to ask Iraj, but one conversation that I would like to bring back, Russell and Sharon, is there is also an initiative that Neil Vroneman from Sabania and Jannie Durant from Remkro is driving between government and business to deal with the challenges specifically that the legal system is experiencing in South Africa, to be able to bring people to justice and to grow the economy in a sense. And it'll be good to have a 3-way conversation at some point between yourself and Jannie and Neil. But that is something that I will talk to Sharon. But over to you, Russell.
Okay, thanks. The way we'll do this is we'll take 1 or 2 questions here, and Sharon, you online as well, and we'll see if there are questions from Sharon's. We'll do them in groups of 3, and hopefully we can get through at least 2 rounds. So let's see, anyone here? And the light is very bright. Let me see.
Okay. I think it's evening now, right? It's after lunch, most. Let me start by appreciating the engagement that we are going to have, because we're still in the progress of having it. I have more of questions, but I'll submarine some of them. Prof, you mentioned that there's a development that is taking place. We move from all the phases or levels of life. You mentioned from technology to certain things. I wanted to check how imperative is that for the developing state to catch up with globalization? Because it's a tangible fact that the more the developing state is trying to catch up with technology, it continues to be a space between the development itself and the developing state. For an example, I think by now the developed states are on their 5th revolution, whereas we're still struggling with the first one. Secondly, you touched the most imperative thing, I think, where you talk about the distribution of a wealth, that it should be compulsory or something like. I didn't catch what you were trying to say, but then I think this one is the reason we find ourselves struggling with the development, especially when it comes to state and certain things. We end up seeing ourselves under the instability of governance that we find ourselves within right now, because of we are struggling for economic liberty. The last one I will suspend that as you say. The last.
So the question really is that he says there's a gap between where society has moved and this idea of being a developmental state. How do we close that gap? What is the challenge around that? Let's get another question, and then Sharon, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell. Good afternoon, Prof. Firstly, thank you very much for this very insightful conversation. I'm going to touch on it takes 3 to tango that you mentioned, that with the solution that we are trying to bring, you mentioned the youth being a very key stakeholder in trying to address the different problems that we are facing globally. I wanted to know that within these 3 folds, if you might check, you mentioned there's the people, there's the society, and there's institutions. The ground root and the core of these 3 institutions, it's human capital, Right. So I wanted to know that what, in your opinion, do you believe is the best strategies that we can try to empower the human capital development of these three institutions to making sure that we try to really get the practicalization of even getting this youth that you are speaking about to come and participate and break the shackles? Because you also mentioned that technology is currently on our side, but I don't believe that our current human capital is developed enough to get into the hang of the technological development. And if we still do not address these three institutions developing, I don't think that we can get to the greener pastures that you were speaking about. So how do we then currently, and who do we actually give the responsibility of human capital development to? Do we go back to the state, or do we speak to institutions, or once again look at ourselves as the people and the society? Thank you.
Thanks. You got that one clear enough, right? Okay. Sharon, over to you.
Again, thank you very much. A question I would like to address with you, please, is one of the questions that's about the future. South Africa is going into a period of change. Not that we're not used to change, but we have an election and there will be something different. We don't know what different is. That fear of the unknown and the different belief systems that are coming from our different governmental corners, we might say. What are the things that we as South Africans, what is the thing we should fear most? What are the things we can do as our three elements of our business and future economic society? What should we be doing to mitigate the risk upon ourselves and the risk upon our assets? And I do say I enjoyed the analogy of the destruction of assets in the journey to an outcome of theft, for example, your computer. It was an interesting visual for me. So if we could just understand, how do we as humans manage the change ahead, and how do we mitigate that negative impact? What can we do as people, as business, as institutions, as government? I have other questions, but I will stop at that because I know we're going to run out of time.
In fact, we'll probably only be able to do one round. So, Iraj?
Yeah, on developmental state, this is a political jargon. It is a platform for state taking charge of resources and allocating it to who they think is fit to have it. If you want to have another state capture, use developmental state. Put it differently, the role of the state is developmental in whatever society. So what is developmental state? They want more resources. To do what? Do the basic stuff first. Prove to me that you can do it. I'll happily pay more. But don't use developmental state as a platform, as an ideological platform, as a political ploy, emotional play to get more resources to build Kusile, to build Madupi, to have water straight in Guyana. And it's not just South Africa, right around the globe. This developmental state was meant theoretically to mean you are not a developed society. Government, use every penny that you have to build the underpinning of your developmental needs. Build your roads, build your human resources, build your families, build your energy, etc., etc. But there is no anti-developmental government. There shouldn't be. So it's an ideological nonsense. What you're saying, and I fully agree with it, we have a lot of developmental requirements. So how do we do it? Not put all of it at the state. We want to develop human resources, bring the best of universities and colleges and the schools and headmasters into a room, leave the ministers out. Say, well, how do we do it? Because the time has changed. You want to develop human resources, you must bring nutritionists. How do you develop a child who is now 11, 10, 15, 18, but from the age of 0 to age of 3 and 5 has not had the appropriate nutrition, appropriate vaccination, appropriate support? How? You're going to throw money at it in the name of developmental state? Minister runs around with bag carriers and DGs fly business class? Will that do developmental human resources? No. Bring the experts in who are at the cutting edge of the technology, say these are the resources that we have and how best do we achieve it. And don't make a statement, put accountable benchmarks of delivery and come report to it. So developmental estate back in 1923 was invented. It was a divide between us and them. We are developed, you are underdeveloped, to know where your place is. And this theory has taken over and the politicians talk about it, nobody else. I can very happily discuss it personally to elaborate more, we haven't got time. On human resources, the best and the most effective natural capital of every society is ours human beings. If we fail to focus on humanity, on human resources, we're going to lose our developmental mission. Even when we build the roads and so on, those human beings will build missiles and tanks and you're going to destroy yourself. And if you don't believe me, watch happened in Russia, what happens in next door to Russia. You understand what I'm saying? Human.2 has evolved to a point that not only intellect, but also our spiritual, moral, ethical values need to be developed, cultivated in balance. Our physicality must be healthy, our mind must be sharpened, but requires nutritionists will tell you how we should develop our kids and so on, but our hearts, our moral values need to come in. If you don't, you become Marcus Euster. When you are a billionaire, you are a crook. And you walk around bragging as if I have made it. Is that humanity? Is that development of human resources? So I'm not talking about getting a CA and becoming Marcus Euster or Gupta or some other crook. Do I make sense? So when we talk about human resource development in the age of transition to human.2, we need to look at the totality of human being, not just the body, the brain, and the yet to be underdeveloped. We need to understand the human side of human resource development, the softer issues. The harder issues now has been Googled. Google it, they'll design it for you. Right? So that's not the challenge anymore. It was 200 years ago. But today, industrialization is not a challenge. Humanization is a challenge. Ethics is a challenge. How do we do it? We need to learn. I know, I'm sorry. What can we do? An awful lot. The first thing that we can do and should not stop doing, we cannot be silent. We need to, in whatever corner we are, don't look for who will lead us. We are all leaders in the little corners that we are. Our corners are important. This notion that we look up to our leaders, no. Look to human beings. And if next door neighbor has got humanity in them, and I wish I had time to give you many, many practical examples, we need to rethink the role that we play. Business has got a role to play. Each one of us has got a role to play, but we cannot collectivize it. We cannot talk about the role of business. Business is not homogeneous. Business is very diverse. Each of them can do different things. There is an awful lot of opportunities in the society that business doesn't do because it says it's the job of the government. There are a lot of opportunities that they should have exploited, but they were quiet because they were scared of the government. It's the industrial age government. Modern government has to be participatory, has to be accountable, has to be transparent. Any minister or president or any authority who comes and says, this is too sensitive, I can't talk about it, he's talking nonsense, he's crooking something. There is nothing that is sensitive about people's lives and people's developmental needs. It's open. So the language has to change. So those are some of the issues. Sharon, there is an awful lot that people do at local level, businesses do, but not enough. because the majority of businesses and the majority of the society lives in the past age. Human.1, we got to move ourselves, and it's tough, and I agree it's tough. Believe me, it's tough.
Thanks, Iraj. Sharon, I'm going to ask you just to close and thank yous, and I'm going to ask the audience to just stay because, as I said, there is a surprise for you once Sharon has done the formal closing, because we on a strict clock here with the live streaming. Sharon?
Thank you very much, Russell. I do appreciate it. Francis, as always, a very professional interviewer. You delved into some difficult issues, and to our guest, you've been absolutely fantastic in terms of sharing with us your insights. And yes, on the many occasions you asked us, do we understand? I think it's actually quite a challenge for all of us in business actually to understand. So Iraj, it's been really interesting hearing the perspectives, understanding the great degree of damage our country has gone through and the risks that face us still going ahead. We've got a lot of risk. It's not easy. But I do like your reference to our can-do culture. I think we're renowned for it globally. And I look forward to seeing all of us, whether we're in the 10th province internationally or anywhere within South Africa, stand up, let's be counted, let's make a difference, and let's save the country from itself at the moment. So thank you very much, Iraj. I think it was really insightful. Francis, thank you. And Russell, very well facilitated. And I look forward to seeing many of your guests over here in the UK. Come visit us to some of our events or come online and join us.
Thank you, Sharon. And you're welcome to come and join us anytime as well. Thank you very much. I'm going to now ask Carmenita to come forward and Peter to deal with the surprise. You can stay here while they deal with this. Thanks. And thank you and thank our online audience. I don't know. It's a surprise.
So, this is my honor to distribute a few books of Iraj, co-written by him and John Sinai. The book is called Future Next, Reimagining Our World and Conquering Uncertainty. So there was a lucky draw. I had nothing to do with it. I was just given the names. And I would like to call all of you to the stage all at once, and then we'll present you with the book. The first winner... people don't know who I am. I'm Peter de Tooy. I'm the president of Convocation. So those of you who don't know me. So the first winner is Mr. Letshego Letelu. Please come forward. The next is Ms. Lucia van Blerk. Next is Shlumelo Kaba. Next, Stephanie Pretorius, or Stephanie Pretorius. And the next is Karabo Morebodi.
And these are very special books. They've been, as Dr. du Toit has indicated, they've been co-written by Dr. Iraj Abedian and John Sinai, and they've also been personalized and autographed by Dr. Iraj Abedian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.